Does Monday at the office feel like a storm? Not with Microsoft Copilot. That feeling when Copilot gets everyone up to speed instantly? It's sunny again. When Copilot simplifies complex data so your teams can act, that sun's shining on a beach. And when Copilot uncovers hidden insights, you're on that beach with your people, and you find buried treasure. That's Microsoft Copilot. Learn more at Microsoft.com/AI for all.
Today on CityCast Chicago, Mayor Brandon Johnson recently announced a plan to borrow, wait for it, $1.25 billion for housing and development investments, and he says the city will pay the debt by letting TIF districts expire. Now, if you hear TIF and you about to cut the podcast off, stop. We always hear Chicagoans complain about them, but do we really know what they are? We've brought in UIC urban planning professor and TIF expert Rachel Weber to break it all down. It's Monday, March 4th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about.
So let's say a developer comes to your neighborhood and wants to build something down the street. The city decides, yes, we will subsidize that development. We'll pay, let's say, 20%. And after that, everybody just pays their property taxes as normal. What they don't see is that a portion of those property taxes goes into the special fund and are used to sort of pay off that subsidy.
Man, it's interesting, the conversation when we think about like stadiums and how much money they ask from the public. We all focus on that, but we are paying for a lot of development, whether we know it or not. Rachel, welcome to CityCast Chicago.
Nice to meet you.
What is tax increment financing, or TIF?
So TIF, or tax increment financing, is a municipal financing tool that allows local governments like the city of Chicago to fund projects, development projects, and pay for infrastructure using property tax revenues that are generated over time by properties within that TIF district. Basically, pull from or draw from the future property tax revenues to pay for development expenses in the present. Any increase in property taxes, because values increase in the area, are forwarded to a special TIF account instead of going to the city's general fund, and they are intended to be used in that area.
So when we say it's coming from property taxes, who exactly is paying into these funds?
Anybody who owns property in that TIF district.
Okay.
So that could be homeowners, it could be business owners, it could be industrial users, anybody who owns property within the boundaries or borders of that TIF district will be paying into that TIF district.
How many exactly are there?
They're designated for a 23-year period. So in addition to new districts coming online, we've got older districts that are terminating or expiring. At one point, about a third of the city's area, so sort of square footage, was covered by a TIF district, which is, quite a lot. And around 10 to 12% of the value, the city's property value, was sort of enclosed within a TIF district.
Got it. So when you talk about what these funds pay for, things like development, what does it not pay for? Because money that goes to general fund pays for things like schools, but this money doesn't. What can't a TIF district fund be used for?
Well, the schools issue is actually a controversial one. So the money that goes to the school district can be used to pay for schools. And that's one of the concerns about TIF, is that the money that goes into those TIF accounts would have otherwise been being broken up in going into the different taxing jurisdictions' own funds. So that includes CPS, it includes the library district, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, my favorite, the Mosquito Abatement District. So when tax revenues go into this TIF fund, these other taxing jurisdictions other than the municipality don't get to touch them. And that's the controversy. The TIF funds themselves are then used as I said, for development projects, that could be, a large-scale mixed-use project, like the Lincoln Yards project. Or it can be used to pay for the demolition of an existing building and the reconstruction of a new one. It could be for an industrial, facility, for a factory. TIF can be used for renovating an existing CTA station, or fixing the sidewalks or streets, or re-engineering traffic circulation in a particular area. So it can be used both as a subsidy to a private developer, or it can be used to pay for things that governments otherwise would pay for, things like infrastructure.
According to the Department of Planning and Development, roughly 1/3 of the city's 121 designated TIF districts are set to expire or potentially expire over the next 3 years. Why does Chicago have so many of these districts, and when did they first start popping up?
The first district in Chicago was designated in around 1983, 84 by Mayor Harold Washington. It was the Central Loop TIF district. But I think if you looked at the number of TIF districts coming online, it really shot up in the late 1990s. And during Mayor Daley's term, Mayor Daley the second, and he was very open about the fact that this was a way that he saw local governments being able to pay for things that the city needed. The federal monies that his father had relied on had basically dried up. And so he was looking for a new source of financing that could help with large-scale projects that the city wanted to see completed, but for whatever reasons, the developers were asking for public assistance. They're asking for some kind of a subsidy. Maybe that project was perceived as being, so big that it was kind of risky, or maybe it was in an area that maybe had not been developing at the same pace. So for whatever reasons, we have a lot of developers asking the city for money. I would argue that they got kind of hooked on this idea of public assistance from, sort of previous projects. But Mayor Daley really gravitated toward TIF, and it was a way of the city government being able to put something on the table in their negotiations with private developers when they were trying to attract large corporations to relocate to Chicago.
I was going to say, do we have any examples of any of these big developments that have come online due to TIF funding? I mean, since the late 90s to now?
There's so many. I mean, pretty much every large-scale development project in the city of Chicago since the 1990s has received an allocation of TIF funds. Some of the theater redevelopments downtown. Even the FedEx site on Goose Island. That's maybe not so big, but it's a business that is seeking to open a new branch or a facility.
I feel like that whole Fulton Market West Loop area.
There was a lot of TIF funds involved in that. The Rush, the building that kind of looks like the Jetsons, the Rush Hospital building that you can see from 290, they received TIF funds. So there are a lot of large-scale, high-profile projects, but then a lot of smaller, affordable housing projects and redevelopment projects. They received TIF funding.
This episode is brought to you by JLL. Get an insider view into the world of commercial real estate with JLL's podcast, Trends and Insights, the Future of Commercial Real Estate. Whether you're curious about making cities more sustainable, the evolution of office space, or AI opportunities, this podcast will help keep you a step ahead. Tune in for candid conversations with business leaders about the biggest trends impacting how we live, work, and play. Subscribe to Trends and Insights now at jll.com/podcast.
Shipping can make or break a sale, so optimize how you ship your orders with ShipStation. They make it easy to automate and manage orders no matter how big your business grows. And they might even be able to help reduce shipping and warehouse costs. So optimize and keep up your momentum for growth with ShipStation. Sign up for your free 60-day trial now at ShipStation.com and use the code POD. That's ShipStation.com with the code POD.
We bring up mayors a lot, right? Harold Washington bringing it growing under Mayor Daley to even Johnson's plan now. Who decides how the money is used? Is it the mayor? Is it the full city council? Is it the alder or alders connected to that district?
The answer is all of the above. You need the alderman's support. The city of Chicago will put together the proposal, and they'll help with the sort of negotiating how much money is available. They're the ones to kind of manage the money that's in the TIF funds. And it's a rare occurrence that a mayor will really get personally involved. And then once you have a proposal in place that's been approved by the Department of Planning and Development, it will go to City Council. But often by the time the city is sort of signed off on it, these meetings are pro forma, right? You generally don't see the behind closed doors kinds of negotiations. And when it gets to City Council, most of the sort of aspects of the deal have already been worked through.
If the value is growing in an area that has a TIF district, you're going to see a pool of money grow faster. But if value is growing slower in certain TIF districts, it seems that now we have a question of equity, right? There are plenty of TIF districts and areas on the south and west sides that remain under development. Why haven't those districts seen the same kind of boost? And is it simply because of how much money is in their fund?
This is a second controversy with TIF, and I would argue that certain inequities are baked into the design of TIF. So if everything's based on how much additional tax revenue a particular area can generate over a 23-year period, then those places that are poised for an increase in property value, in effect, are sort of better endowed even before the TIF comes into play.
Right. I was going to say the property value system of funding schools and local libraries is already in itself sort of birthed inequity.
Exactly, because you're dependent on value, right? And so you're saying that higher valued places, higher valued buildings, that those are places that deserve better public services and infrastructure. And similarly with TIF, the places that are best able to increase in increase their property values are those that are going to have the most money to play with. And so those tend to be places that already have a leg up. So we really saw during the Daley administration the moat, the kind of value moat around the loop. Those were the areas that were really targeted for TIF. And one would expect values to increase in those areas. And if in reality they did, and because they were all TIF'd, the majority of the property taxes went into these TIF funds and sort of helped to subsidize development there. So it's kind of a reinforcing spiral for places that are already or have, pretty strong potential to be developed. That leaves out a lot of places in our city.
Mayor Brandon Johnson's new proposal is partly a plan to pay for programs he wants to pay for, but it's also a big overhaul to a funding mechanism in the city that the city has used for decades. How is this different from previous efforts to reform TIF?
We've been engaged in multiple efforts to reform TIF to make it more transparent, and the city's done a good job of disclosing a lot of information. It's now possible to know how much money is in each of those TIF districts or where those TIF districts are. When I started researching TIF 25 years ago, you couldn't get any of that information, and now it's available nicely online through a portal. So there have been efforts to make the process a little bit more effective and focused on things that will benefit more people in the city instead of just being sort of individual types of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back kind of development deals. So, but what the mayor is proposing is a step in a very different direction, which is to let these existing TIF districts expire and to use the revenues that are there in ways that can benefit places that are not in a TIF district. You're effectively liberating the property tax revenues that had been constrained in those TIF districts, at least spatially or locationally. So it gives the city a lot more flexibility to fund good projects all over the city.
Not to dig crazy into the details, but two questions I had kind of coming off of that, right? Because this entire time, schools, libraries within TIF districts have said we haven't been getting as much money as we could be getting. So if now those TIFs end, but the money that's being sort of made back is being used by the city to pay off the debt from borrowed money now, won't that criticism still exist?
My understanding is that in this new plan, the city will only be using the municipality's portion of the TIF revenue. So when a TIF expires, which is what's going to happen, all of those overlapping districts, like the library district and CPS, they'll now just have more tax base to tax.
Got it.
So they will have access to those revenues that had previously been restricted and kept from them as a result of TIF.
Johnson's plan sounds like it'll let, he hasn't actually said how many he'll let expire, if it'll be all of them. Is this sort of an end of the TIF as we know it, or will it still be a tool that you think the city will use moving forward, maybe just with more scrutiny or oversight?
That would be my hope. I mean, I think that we went a little crazy in the 90s and 2000s in terms of designating new TIF districts instead of making sure that the existing TIF districts did what they were intended to do. And so I do think that what the mayor is doing is signaling that he's willing to let TIF districts expire and not just to keep them in perpetuity and allow them to keep on basically being renewed. If you can't do what you're trying to do within 23 years, I gotta say, maybe it wasn't the right decision in the first place, or it's always easy to find a reason to keep something alive. But I do think the mayor is signaling that he's really intending to not to extend existing TIF districts. Whether or not his administration is open to designating new TIF districts in places where there's really some basis for this tool to work its magic, unclear.
Yeah, his spending plan will need city council approval. How politically viable do you think this plan is in terms of substantially moving away from TIFs, given, it's in many cases to be expected at this point? People may not be able to imagine beyond it in some cases.
Yeah, no, I do think both developers and local officials, including aldermen, have gotten used to TIF. I almost want to say addicted, right? So it's going to be difficult to wean the city off of this tool. But I think it is possible. I think there are some aldermen who don't necessarily feel like that the program has served them well, possibly because there's not a whole lot of money in their TIF accounts. But as we saw, one of the reasons I would argue for the proliferation of TIF districts in Chicago is that when one alderman had one, the alderman in the ward next door said, "Hey, I want one of those too." And then everybody had one, but they weren't necessarily working equally well for each alderman. So I think there'll be some support for the mayor's proposal. There'll also be some resistance from those aldermen who feel like they really need this tool as a negotiation chip, basically something to put on the table when they're working with developers and trying to encourage new businesses to come into particular places or to get rid of this particular vacant lot or this eyesore. TIF was one of the few things that the alderman could promise a potential developer as a kind of sweetener for the deal.
Where can people find out where the TIF districts are in the city and if there are any in their current neighborhood and where they live?
If they go to the city's Department of Planning and Development's website, they'll see information about TIF. The what I call the portal. They'll see a map of all TIF districts in the city of Chicago. And then they'll be able to go to like PDFs of documents to see how much money's in each of those TIF districts, what were the original plans for each of those districts. So you see what the city's priorities are for that area. If it's industrial preservation or if it's, building new housing. And now that so many of these TIF districts are so old, those plans are also quite old, but the city does have to state what they'd like to see take place in these areas.
We can talk about this all day long, Rachel. Time will tell exactly how this plan goes through, but the hope of the Johnson administration is to pass their spending plan by the end of March, so we'll continue to follow this. Rachel, thank you so much for making room in your day for CityCast Chicago.
Oh, my pleasure. So nice to talk to you, Jacoby. Take care.
Before we let you go, we want to give a huge happy birthday to the city of Chicago. And if you love this city nearly as much as we do and you want to stay tapped in, the best thing for you to do, bookmark our website, chicago.citycast.fm. If you go there now, you'll find our guide to March, great neighborhood tours, election explainers, and events all over the city. And you can get this in your inbox every Monday through Friday morning by subscribing to our Hey Chicago newsletter. You came for the TIF explainer and you stayed for some good news. Today is the last day to apply for the Chicago Public Library Maker in Residence. Maybe you make rugs, maybe you paint or do photography. Whatever your craft, you'll get to share it with library visitors, teach classes, and create a piece that'll be on display at the Harold Washington Library Center in the Loop. Yes, it is paid, and the application link is in the show notes. As always, we appreciate you for reading, listening, becoming a CityCast Chicago member, and most importantly, being here bright and early tomorrow. I'll talk to you then. Peace. I was going to say, letting a bunch of 23-year plans expire to take on a 37-year plan of repayment. I love how money works. Like, you know what? I ain't going to be married. Whatever.
Yeah, somebody else's problem.
Figure it out.
That's going to be somebody else's problem.
Yeah, I need these headlines. Mm-hmm.